When Clara Bennett stepped off that dusty Wyoming train in August 1889, she knew immediately the agency had made a terrible mistake. Standing beside her was Vivian Moore, blonde and breathtaking, the kind of woman wealthy ranchers actually ordered. Clara was plain, quiet, nobody's first choice. So when Ethan Cole approached the platform, his weathered face unreadable, she did what she'd always done, prepared to disappear. But before she could speak, before Vivian could smile, Ethan's dark eyes found hers. "You're Clara," he said, not a question. She nodded, throat tight. "Then there's no mistake." His voice was steady as stone. "I ordered right." Welcome to a story about being chosen when you've spent your whole life being overlooked. If you're watching from anywhere in the world, drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far Clara's journey travels. Now, let's see what happens when the wrong girl becomes exactly the right woman. The train's whistle cut through the August heat like a knife through butter, and Clara Bennett pressed her gloved hand against the window, watching Wyoming unfold in shades of gold and dust. She'd memorized every word of Ethan Cole's letters, sparse, honest words about a ranch, 2 children, and a life that needed steadying. Nothing flowery, nothing false. Just an invitation to something real. She hadn't expected company. "Third time's the charm, don't you think?" Vivian Moore's voice carried the kind of confidence Clara had never possessed, bright and certain as summer light. The woman beside her adjusted her traveling hat, pale blue with silk flowers, and smoothed the bodice of a dress that had cost more than Clara's entire trunk. "I do hope Mr. Blackwood is as distinguished as his letters suggested. A cattle baron, imagine that." Clara's fingers tightened on her worn carpet bag. I thought this was a private arrangement." "Oh, the agency books passage for several girls at once," Vivian said airily, studying her reflection in the window glass. "More efficient that way, though between us—" She leaned closer, voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "I suspect you and I aren't headed to the same ranch. You're far too—" She gestured vaguely, kindly, the way people did when they meant well but couldn't hide the truth. "Plain." That's what she meant. Plain and past 25 and wearing a gray dress that had been mended twice. "Of course," Clara murmured. The words tasted like every moment of her life, small, apologetic, taking up as little space as possible. The train lurched, slowing. Through the window, a wooden platform materialized from the shimmer of heat, and beyond it, nothing but endless sky and the kind of emptiness that made Boston feel like another world entirely. Clara's heart hammered. This was real. This was happening. A man she'd never met had paid her passage west, had written careful words about needing help with his children, about building something steady after loss. She hadn't told him everything. How could she? Some truths were too heavy for letters. The train shuddered to a stop. Steam hissed. Vivian was already standing, checking her hair, her dress, the tilt of her hat. Clara rose more slowly, legs unsteady, and followed her toward the door. The platform was sun-bleached wood and dust. 2 men stood waiting, one older, silver-haired, wearing a suit despite the heat. The other stood apart, younger, lean and weathered in work clothes and a wide-brimmed hat pulled low. Clara's breath caught. That had to be Ethan Cole. He looked exactly like his words, solid, quiet, unadorned. Vivian descended first, a vision of confidence and curves and calculated beauty. Clara came after, feeling every thread of her plain dress, every year of her plain face. "Mr. Blackwood!" Vivian's voice rang out like a bell. "What a pleasure to finally—" "Miss Moore?" The silver-haired man stepped forward, his smile practiced and smooth. "I'm Frederick Blackwood. Welcome to Wyoming." Vivian's face lit up. She moved toward him with the grace of someone who'd never doubted her welcome anywhere, which left Clara standing alone on the platform, carpetbag heavy in her hand, facing the man in the work clothes who hadn't moved, hadn't smiled, whose eyes beneath that hat brim were dark and unreadable as river stone. "Mr. Cole?" Her voice came out smaller than she'd intended. He didn't answer right away. Just looked at her, really looked. The kind of looking that felt like being seen straight through. Clara's stomach twisted. This was it. This was the moment he'd realized the agency had made a mistake, had sent the wrong woman, had somehow confused orders or lost paperwork, or "You're Clara Bennett." Not a question. A statement, flat and sure. "I am." She forced herself to meet his eyes. "But I think, Mr. Cole, I think there's been some confusion. The agency, they didn't tell me there would be others, and Miss Moore she's not you." "No, what?" Ethan Cole pushed his hat back, and Clara saw his face clearly for the first time. Strong-boned, sun-carved, with lines around his eyes that spoke of squinting at horizons and grief worn into the skin. He wasn't young. Neither was she. But there was something in his expression, something that looked almost like relief. "The agency sent 2 women," he said, voice low and rough as gravel. "One I asked for, one I didn't." His gaze flicked toward Vivian, then back to Clara. "You wrote about your mother's garden, about teaching children their letters, about how a house is just walls until someone makes it a home." Clara's throat closed. She had written that. Late at night, by candlelight, pouring herself onto paper because it was easier than speaking, because words could be true when your voice failed you. "I asked for someone steady," Ethan continued, "someone who understood work and worry and making do, someone who'd teach my children kindness, not vanity." His jaw tightened. "I ordered you, Clara, and there's no mistake." Behind them, Vivian's laughter rang out, bright and performative. Frederick Blackwood was already leading her toward a gleaming carriage, his hand at her elbow, his voice carrying promises of a grand house and a bright future. Clara couldn't move, couldn't breathe. She'd spent 27 years being the wrong choice, the daughter who couldn't save her mother, the woman who'd made one terrible mistake and spent forever paying for it, the charity case Boston wanted to forget. And here was a stranger saying he'd chosen her on purpose. "I don't understand," she whispered. Ethan picked up her carpet bag as if it weighed nothing. "Don't need to. Not yet." He nodded toward a wagon at the far end of the platform. Plain, practical, built for work, not show. "Come on. It's a 2-hour ride to the ranch. We can talk on the way." He started walking. Clara stood frozen, watching him go. This man who'd looked at her and seen something worth choosing. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to get back on that train, to return to Boston where at least she understood her place in the world. But Boston had nothing for her. No family, no future, no forgiveness for the kind of sin that stained a woman forever. Just cold rooms and colder shoulders and the slow suffocation of being alive but not living. Ethan reached the wagon and set her bag in the back, turned, waited. Clara's feet moved before her mind caught up. She crossed the platform, dust rising with each step, and when Ethan offered his hand to help her up, she took it. His palm was calloused, warm, steady. "Thank you," she said quietly. He nodded once and climbed up beside her. The wagon lurched into motion, and Wyoming opened before them, vast and empty and terrifying in its possibility. They rode in silence for a long stretch, the only sounds the creak of wheels and the steady clip of hooves. Clara kept her hands folded in her lap, watching the landscape roll past. Grassland and scrub brush and the mountains rising purple in the distance. So much space, so much sky. After Boston's narrow streets and narrower minds, it felt like breathing for the first time. "My daughter's name is Lily," Ethan said eventually, not looking at her. "She's 6, smart as a whip, scared of her own shadow since her mama died." His hands tightened on the reins. "My son's Thomas, 8, angry at the world and everyone in it." Clara's chest ached. She knew that anger, had worn it herself once before she learned that anger in a woman was just another sin. "How long has it been?" she asked. "Since you lost your wife?" 2 years? The words were flat, factual. She was good, kind, strong. She died bringing our 3rd into the world, and the baby went with her." He swallowed hard. "Thomas barely speaks anymore. Lily cries if I leave her sight, and He stopped, started again. "I'm drowning. Can't run the ranch, can't be what they need. Can't be both parents and both judge. Myself a failure at it." The honesty of it struck Clara like a physical blow. No pretense, no pride. just the raw truth of a man at the end of his rope. "I'm not her," Clara said quietly. "Your wife. I can't replace—" "Don't want you to." Ethan's voice was firm. "Sarah's gone. Can't change that, can't bring her back. But those children need someone who'll stay, who'll show up every morning and not run when things get hard." Finally, he looked at her. "You strike me as the staying type." Claire's hands trembled in her lap. If he only knew. If he had any idea of the one time she hadn't stayed, the one time she'd been too weak, too powerless, too broken to fight. "I'll do my best," she whispered. It was all she could promise, all she had left to give. The ranch appeared as the sun began its slow descent, a sprawling property of weathered buildings and sturdy fences, cattle dotting the grassland like scattered seeds. The house itself was large but plain, 2 stories of unpainted wood that had gone gray with age and weather. Practical. Built to last. Ethan pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the porch. Before Clara could climb down, the front door banged open and a small figure shot out, a girl in a faded dress, dark braids flying, her face equal parts hope and terror. "Papa!" Lily stopped short when she saw Clara, her eyes going wide. "It's all right, sweetheart." Ethan jumped down and scooped his daughter up, though she was almost too big for it. "This is Miss Bennett. She's come to help us." Lily buried her face in her father's shoulder, peeking out at Clara with one dark eye. Clara smiled, gentle, non-threatening, the way she'd learned to approach frightened things. "Hello, Lily. You can call me Clara." The girl didn't respond, just watched, wary as a wild creature. A shadow moved in the doorway. A boy stood there, thin, all sharp edges and harder eyes. Thomas. He looked Clara up and down, his expression cold and calculating beyond his years. "You ain't pretty," he said flatly. "Thomas." Ethan's voice carried a warning. "What? She ain't. Not like Mama was." The boy crossed his arms. "Why'd you bring her here?" Clara's face burned, but she kept her voice steady. "You're right. I'm not pretty. But I can cook, and I can clean, and I can read, and I know my numbers. And your father says you need help, so here I am." Thomas's eyes narrowed. "We don't need help. We're fine." "You're not fine," Ethan said quietly, setting Lily down. "None of us are. And that's why Miss Bennett is here." "I don't want her here," Thomas's voice cracked, rage and grief tangling together. "I don't want anyone here who's not Mama." He turned and ran, not into the house, but past it, toward the barn, his boots pounding hard against the earth. Ethan's shoulders sagged. Lily's eyes filled with tears. And Clara stood there in her plain gray dress on this ranch at the end of the world, looking at 2 broken children and 1 exhausted man, and thought, "This is what I came for. This is where I'm meant to be." Even if it killed her, even if they never wanted her, even if she failed again, she'd chosen to come. Now she'd choose to stay. "Let me see the kitchen," she said quietly, "and tell me what they like to eat." The house was clean but hollow, floors swept, dishes washed, everything in its place and nothing alive about it. Clara moved through the rooms while Ethan brought in her trunk, taking inventory. Sturdy furniture, a cold stove, windows that needed washing. The bones were good. It just needed someone to breathe life back into it. Lily followed her like a ghost, silent and wide-eyed. Clara didn't push, just narrated what she was doing in a low, steady voice, checking the pantry, noting supplies, finding the root cellar. When she discovered a crock of sourdough starter, carefully tended, she stopped. "Did your mother bake?" she asked Lily softly. The little girl nodded, tears spilling over. "Then we'll keep her starter alive," Clara said. "That's important. That's how we remember the people we love, by keeping the good things going." Lily's hand crept into hers, small, warm, trusting. Clara's heart cracked open. By the time Ethan came back inside, Clara had a fire going in the stove and was peeling potatoes. Lily sat at the table watching her with solemn attention. "She usually hides upstairs until supper," Ethan said quietly. "She's helping me," Clara replied, not looking up. "Aren't you, Lily?" The girl nodded, almost smiling. Ethan stood there a moment longer, something shifting in his expression. Then he turned and went back outside, leaving them to their work. Thomas didn't come in for supper. Ethan went to fetch him twice, and twice came back alone, his face grim. Finally, Clara ladled stew into a bowl and wrapped fresh bread in a cloth. "I'll take it to him," she said. "He won't eat it," Ethan warned. "Maybe not, but I'll take it anyway." The barn was dim and warm, smelling of hay and horses and work. Clara found Thomas in the loft, curled up in the straw, his face turned toward the wall. "I brought you supper," she said, setting the bowl and bread on a crate. "You don't have to eat it, but it's here if you want it." She started to leave. "Why'd you come?" Thomas's voice was muffled, thick. Clara stopped, turned back. The boy still wasn't looking at her, but his shoulders were shaking. "Because your father asked me to," she said honestly. "Because I didn't have anywhere else to go. Because sometimes people need each other, even when they don't want to." "I don't need you." "I know." Clara sat down on the crate, careful not to crowd him. "But maybe I need you. Did you think of that?" Thomas rolled over then, his eyes red and fierce. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means I've spent a long time being nobody's first choice," Clara said quietly. "Being the one people overlook or pity or forget. And then your father wrote to me and said he needed someone steady, someone who'd stay. Nobody's ever needed me before, Thomas. Not like that. Not for something that matters." She met his angry gaze steadily. "So maybe you don't need me. But I need to be here. I need to try." The boy stared at her. For a long moment, Clara thought he'd throw something, or curse, or tell her to leave. Instead, his face crumpled. "I miss my mama," he choked out. "I miss her every day, and it don't get better. And Papa's trying so hard, but he can't be her, and I can't. Clara moved without thinking, pulling the boy into her arms. He fought for a second, then collapsed against her, sobbing like the child he was beneath all that armor. She held him and rocked him and said nothing, because there were no words for this kind of grief. There was only presence, only staying. When the storm finally passed, Thomas pulled back, wiping his face roughly. He looked at the bowl of stew, then at Clara. "It's probably cold now," he muttered. "Probably," Clara agreed, "but it'll still fill your belly." He picked up the bowl, started eating, didn't say thank you. He didn't need to. Clara walked back to the house through the purple dusk, and when she came through the door, Ethan looked up from where he sat with Lily in his lap. Their eyes met across the lamplit room. "He's eating," Clara said simply. Something in Ethan's face eased. He nodded once, and Clara saw it. The first thread of trust, thin as spider silk, but there. She'd made a beginning. It would have to be enough. That night, Clara lay in the small room off the kitchen that had been prepared for her, staring at the ceiling. The bed was narrow but clean, the quilt hand-stitched in a pattern she didn't recognize. Through the walls she could hear the house settling, and farther off the sound of cattle lowing in the darkness. She thought of Boston, of the narrow room she'd rented, the factory work that had broken her hands, the church ladies who'd looked through her like glass, of the shame that had followed her like a shadow ever since that terrible year when she'd been 17 and stupid and trusting and... No, she couldn't think of that. Couldn't let herself remember the weight in her arms, the face she'd glimpsed for only a moment before they took him away. The son she'd never held again. The choice that hadn't been a choice at all. Ethan didn't know. He'd chosen her thinking she was just plain and practical and steady. If he knew the truth, that she'd been ruined, that she'd given birth in a home for unwed mothers, that she'd surrendered her own child because she'd had no money, no family, no way to keep him, he'd send her back. She knew it. Men didn't want used goods, didn't want women marked by sin. Even good men had limits. But Thomas's weight in her arms tonight, the way he'd finally let himself break, that had felt like penance. Like maybe, after 10 years, she could start to forgive herself by caring for children who needed her. Even if they never knew. Even if she never told them. Even if this, too, ended badly. Clara closed her eyes and listened to the Wyoming wind, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, she let herself hope. Maybe the wrong girl could still become the right one. Maybe broken things could still be made whole. Maybe staying was the only redemption she'd ever need. Outside, the stars wheeled across an endless sky, and the ranch slept, unaware that everything was about to change. The first week passed in a rhythm of small victories and smaller defeats. Clara learned the shape of the household, how Ethan rose before dawn and came in after dark smelling of leather and honest sweat. How Lily would only eat if Clara sat beside her. How Thomas watched everything with those hard, measuring eyes, but came to the table now without being called twice. She learned other things, too. The way Ethan's jaw tightened when he looked at his children and saw his failures instead of their resilience. The nightmare that woke Lily every third night, sending her running to Clara's room instead of her father's. The way Thomas's anger was really fear, and his cruelty was really a test. Will you leave too? Will you prove me right? Clara didn't leave. She got up before dawn and made coffee strong enough to strip paint. She baked bread with Lily's small hands helping, teaching her the way her own mother had taught her, with patience and flour everywhere and the understanding that perfection mattered less than presence. She mended Thomas's torn shirt without comment and left it on his bed, watching from the window as he found it, his face doing something complicated before he pulled it on. And every evening, she set 4 places at the table. Every evening, they sat together. Every evening, she stayed. On the 8th day, a wagon rolled up the drive while Clara was hanging laundry. She recognized the horses first, matched bays groomed to gleaming, and then the carriage itself, painted and polished like something from Boston. Her stomach dropped. Frederick Blackwood climbed down first, then turned to help his passenger. Vivian Moore emerged like a vision, her pale blue dress immaculate despite the dust, her face carefully neutral. Clara's hands stilled on the sheet she'd been pinning, her heart hammering. "Miss Bennet!" Blackwood's voice carried false warmth. How fortuitous. "Is Mr. Cole available?" Clara's throat went dry. She forced herself to walk toward them, wiping her damp hands on her apron. "He's checking fences in the north pasture. Can I help you with something?" "We've come on a matter of some delicacy." Blackwood's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Perhaps we might wait inside. The heat is rather oppressive." Everything in Clara wanted to refuse, but refusing meant looking petty, territorial, unwelcoming, all the things a woman in her position couldn't afford to be. She nodded stiffly and led them into the house, hyper-aware of her worn dress and work-reddened hands, the flour still dusting her sleeves from morning baking. Vivian's eyes swept the kitchen, clean but plain, functional rather than beautiful. Something flickered across her face, too quick to name. "Please, sit." Clara's voice came out steadier than she felt. "I can make coffee." "That won't be necessary." Blackwood settled himself at the table like he owned it. "This won't take long. You see, Miss Moore and I have been having extensive conversations this past week, and certain irregularities have come to light." Clara's pulse jumped. "Irregularities?" Vivian finally spoke, her voice quieter than Clara remembered. "The marriage agency that arranged our passage west, they weren't entirely honest with either of us." "I don't understand." Blackwood pulled papers from his jacket, official-looking documents with stamps and seals. "The Westward Matrimonial Society has been operating under somewhat creative business practices. They've been sending multiple women to the same destinations, encouraging competition, and in some cases," he paused meaningfully, "forging correspondence to suit their commercial interests." The words hit Clara like cold water. "Forging?" "The letters you received from Mr. Cole," Vivian said carefully, not quite meeting Clara's eyes. "Some of them may not have been written by him at all. The agency employs writers who craft correspondence designed to appeal to specific types of women, to secure their fees." Clara's world tilted. She thought of those letters, the ones she'd read until the creases wore soft, the words she'd memorized because they'd felt like someone finally seen her, someone who understood work and worry and making do. Had those been lies? Calculated manipulations? "Why are you telling me this?" Her voice sounded distant, hollow. Blackwood leaned forward, his expression calculated sympathy. "Because Miss Moore has been honest with me about her circumstances, and I believe in operating with integrity. The truth is, the agency sent Miss Moore here expecting Mr. Cole would prefer her, a woman of beauty and refinement, over," he gestured vaguely at Clara, "over someone more serviceable." When he chose you instead, they likely assumed it was a temporary aberration, that eventually he'd recognize his mistake. The cruelty of it stole Clara's breath. She'd known, hadn't she? Known she was nobody's first choice, known men like Ethan Cole didn't choose women like her unless something was wrong with the alternative. And now here was the proof. She'd been a backup plan, a safety net, the woman you settled for when the real option fell through. I see. The words scraped out. And you've come to… what? Offer Mr. Cole a chance to correct his error? Not exactly. Vivian finally looked at her directly, and something in her eyes wasn't triumph. It was something stranger, almost like regret. Mr. Blackwood believes in fair dealing. He wants to ensure everyone involved understands the true situation before making permanent commitments. How generous, Clara said, and hated how bitter she sounded. The door banged open. Thomas stood there sweaty and wild-eyed from whatever he'd been doing outside, and his gaze locked on the visitors with instant hostility. "Who are you?" he demanded. "Thomas, these are…" Clara started. "I asked them, not you." Blackwood's smile turned indulgent. "I'm Frederick Blackwood, young man, and this is Miss Vivian Moore. We're friends of your father's." "Papa don't have friends who dress like that." Thomas's voice dripped scorn. "And he especially don't have friends who show up when he ain't here and upset Miss Bennett." Clara's heart squeezed. The boy barely tolerated her, fought her on everything, and yet here he was, defending her with all the fierce loyalty of his 8-year-old heart. "I'm not upset," she said quietly. "Yes, you are." Thomas crossed his arms. "Your hands are shaking." They were. Clara hid them in her apron. "Why don't you go find your father? Tell him we have visitors." Thomas looked at her a long moment, something adult and knowing in his young face. Then he turned and ran, and Clara was alone again with the two people who just shattered her fragile hope into pieces. "Spirited child," Blackwood observed, though clearly lacking discipline. "He's grieving," Clara said flatly. "His mother died 2 years ago. Discipline matters less than compassion right now." Vivian's expression shifted. Surprise, maybe, or something softer. "You care about them, the children." "Of course I do." "Even though they're not yours? Even though you've known them barely more than a week?" Clara met her eyes. "They're children who've lost too much too young. Whether they're mine or not doesn't change what they need." Before Vivian could respond, hoofbeats thundered into the yard. Ethan appeared moments later, Thomas clinging to the back of his saddle, both of them dusty and alert. Ethan's gaze swept the scene, the fancy carriage, Blackwood's confident posture, Vivian's practiced beauty, and Clara standing there trying not to look as broken as she felt. "Blackwood," Ethan's voice was flat, giving nothing away. "Wasn't expecting you." "Cole," Blackwood rose smoothly. "We've come on a matter that requires your immediate attention. It concerns the rather unfortunate circumstances under which these women were delivered to Wyoming." Ethan's jaw tightened. He looked at Clara, and she couldn't read his face, couldn't tell if he was angry or embarrassed or already regretting the choice he'd made on that train platform. "Thomas, go find your sister," Ethan said quietly. "Take her upstairs." "But Papa, now!" Thomas went, but not before shooting one last poisonous look at Blackwood. Ethan stepped inside, pulling off his hat, dust settling around him like judgment. "All right, say what you came to say." Blackwood laid out the situation with practiced efficiency. The agency's deceptions, the forged letters, the deliberate manipulation designed to maximize profit regardless of human cost. He spoke of integrity and honesty and ensuring everyone understood the truth before binding commitments were made. He made it sound noble, this exposure of fraud. But Clara heard what he wasn't saying. "You chose wrong. Here's your chance to choose again." Throughout it all, Ethan's face remained unreadable as carved stone. He listened, asked no questions, gave no indication what he was thinking. When Blackwood finally finished, silence stretched like wire pulled too tight. "That everything?" Ethan asked. "Not quite." Blackwood glanced at Vivian. "Miss Moore has been frank with me about her own situation. The agency promised her to me, yes, but under false pretenses, telling her I was a different sort of man than I am, suggesting she'd be valued for qualities beyond her appearance. We've agreed that while I find her quite lovely, we're fundamentally unsuited to one another. He paused. However, I believe she and you might find a more appropriate arrangement. She's educated, refined, accustomed to managing staff and social obligations, the sort of woman a successful rancher ought to have at his side. Claire's fingernails bit into her palms. Here it was, then. The moment she'd been waiting for since she stepped off that train. The moment when reality corrected its mistake and put everyone back in their proper places. Vivian with the successful rancher, Clara on the next train east. And what does Miss Moore think of this arrangement? Ethan's voice was dangerously quiet. Vivian stood, her composure finally cracking. I think Mr. Blackwood means well, but he's an idiot. She turned to face Ethan fully. Yes, the agency lied. Yes, they forged letters and manipulated us all. But I've watched you this past week, Mr. Cole. I've seen how you look at your children, how hard you're trying to hold everything together. I've seen, she glanced at Clara, how she fits here in a way I never would. I don't want to be anyone's second choice, and I don't want to destroy something that's actually working just because some bureaucrat thinks beauty trumps character. Blackwood's face darkened. Vivian, we discussed. You discussed. Her voice turned sharp. I listened. There's a difference. She looked at Clara then, really looked, and what Clara saw in her face wasn't pity or contempt. It was recognition. One unwanted woman seeing another. The agency lied to both of us, Miss Bennett. They told me Mr. Cole was a wealthy landowner looking for a wife to display, to prove his status. They told you he was a simple rancher who needed help with children. Both were manipulations designed to get us on that train and their money in their pockets. She drew a breath. But here's what matters. What did Mr. Cole actually write? What did he actually ask for? Ethan moved then, crossing to a small desk in the corner. He pulled out a sheaf of papers, rough drafts, crossed out and rewritten, showing the labor of a man unused to putting feelings into words. He handed them to Clara without speaking. Her hands trembled as she unfolded the first one. The handwriting was the same as the letters she'd received, but rougher, more uncertain. I need someone who understands that life is work, and work is life. And the only thing that matters is showing up every day even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. Another page. My children have been hurt enough. I won't bring someone into their lives who sees them as obligations or inconveniences. They need someone who'll see them as people worth knowing, worth fighting for, even when they push back, especially when they push back. A third, with whole sections crossed out and rewritten. I'm not looking for beauty or refinement or someone to impress the neighbors. I'm looking for steady, for real, for someone who'll stay when staying is the hardest thing there is. Clara's vision blurred. These words, these exact words, had been in the letters she'd received, not forged, not manufactured. His. The agency added their own flourishes to make my letters more appealing, Ethan said quietly. Prettied them up, made me sound more educated than I am, but the core, what I was actually asking for, that was all mine. He looked at Clara, his dark eyes steady. I asked for you. Maybe not by name, but by nature. I asked for exactly what you are. But you didn't know, Clara whispered. You didn't know what I... She stopped, the words catching in her throat. What I've done, what I've been, the ways I'm broken and wrong and ruined. I know you get up before dawn and make coffee strong enough to wake the dead, Ethan said. I know you mended Thomas's shirt and left it without demanding gratitude. I know Lily sleeps through the night now because you sit with her when the nightmares come. I know you look at my children and see people, not burdens. His voice roughened. That's what I need to know. The rest, whatever you think disqualifies you, matters a hell of a lot less than what you do every single day. Blackwood made an impatient sound. Cole, be reasonable. Miss Moore is objectively the superior choice. Educated, refined, beautiful, and unhappy here, Vivian interrupted. Mr. Cole, I won't lie. You're a good man, and in different circumstances, I'd count myself lucky. But I don't want to be on a ranch in the middle of nowhere raising children who aren't mine and pretending I'm content. She lifted her chin. I want to go to California. I want to teach school or work in a dress shop or do something that's mine, chosen by me, not assigned by an agency that sees women as inventory. Then go, Ethan said simply. I'll pay your passage. You deserve that much after being dragged into this mess. Vivian's eyes widened. You'd do that? Even though you're beautiful and educated and all the things Blackwood thinks I should want? Ethan's voice carried an edge. Yes, because women aren't merchandise, and I won't treat you like you are just because some agency decided to play games with people's lives. Something shifted in the room. Blackwood sputtered, starting to argue about investments and agreements and propriety. But Vivian was looking at Ethan with new respect, and Clara was trying to breathe around the hope and fear tangled in her chest, and Ethan stood there like stone, immovable in his certainty. Clara stays, he said, not loudly, but with absolute finality. That's not negotiable. Miss Moore goes to California with enough money to start over. That's not negotiable either. And Blackwood, his eyes went hard. You and I are going to have words about showing up at a man's ranch when he's not home and upsetting his household. That's definitely not negotiable. Blackwood's face flushed. Now see here. No, you see here. Ethan stepped forward, and there was something in his posture that made Blackwood step back. I don't care how much money you have or how many cattle you run. You don't come into my home, look at a woman who's working herself to exhaustion, trying to help my family heal, and tell her she's second rate. You don't do that and get to walk away thinking we're square. I was merely pointing out objective facts. You were being cruel, Vivian said quietly, and I should have stopped you sooner. She turned to Clara. I'm sorry. Truly. You didn't deserve that. Clara couldn't speak. Her throat was too tight, her eyes burning with tears she refused to shed in front of these people. She'd spent so many years being told she was less than, not enough, the wrong choice. And here was a stranger who'd known her barely more than a week defending her like she mattered, like she was worth fighting for. Mr. Cole, she finally managed, you don't have to, I understand if you'd rather. Clara. He said her name like a command and a question at once. Look at me. She did. His face was weathered and hard and honest, and in his eyes she saw no pity, no reluctance, no regret. I ordered right, he said. Nothing that happened here today changes that. The tears came then, hot and sudden and impossible to stop. Clara turned away, ashamed, but Ethan's hand caught her elbow. Not restraining, just steady, just there. Blackwood, get out, he said without looking away from Clara. Take your carriage and your opinions and don't come back unless you've learned some manners. This is highly irregular. I said get out. The steel in his voice left no room for argument. Blackwood gathered his papers with stiff dignity and stalked toward the door. Vivian lingered a moment longer. Clara, she said softly. He's right. You fit here. I can see it, even if you can't yet. She smiled, sad and genuine. Thank you for being kind to me on the train. I hope you find what you're looking for. Then she was gone, and it was just Ethan and Clara in the quiet kitchen, the afternoon sun slanting through the windows, dust motes dancing in the light. I'm sorry, Clara whispered. I'm sorry you had to, that they came here and… Stop! Ethan's voice was gentle now, the hardness gone. You didn't do anything wrong. They did. The agency did, not you. But if you'd known, if you'd seen her first… I did see her first, on the platform, remember? He let go of her arm but didn't step away. She was beautiful and confident and everything men are supposed to want. And all I could think was how tired she'd be of ranch life in 6 months, how she'd grow to resent my children for keeping her here, how she'd wake up one day and realize she'd traded her dreams for mine and hate me for it. Clara looked up at him, searching his face. Then I saw you, Ethan continued, looking terrified and determined all at once, wearing a dress that had been mended so many times it was more mending than dress, holding yourself like you expected to be turned away but came anyway because you didn't have anywhere else to go. His mouth quirked, almost a smile. And I thought, there, that's someone who knows what hard is. That's someone who'll fight when fighting matters. I'm not a fighter, Clara said hoarsely. I've made mistakes, Mr. Cole, terrible mistakes. If you knew, then tell me." He said it simply, like it was the easiest thing in the world. "Tell me what you think I need to know." The words clawed at her throat, desperate to escape after 10 years of silence. But fear held them back. Fear of his disgust, his rejection, the inevitable moment when he'd see her the way Boston had seen her and realize he'd made a terrible mistake after all. "I can't," she whispered. "Not yet. Maybe not ever. But I promise I'll be good to your children. I promise I'll work hard and stay as long as you'll let me. I promise—" "Clara." He waited until she met his eyes. "I'm not asking for promises. I'm asking you to breathe, to stay, to give this time to become what it might be." He paused. "I know you're scared. Hell, I'm scared too. But we're both here. We're both trying. That's enough for now." Outside, the sound of children's voices drifted down. Thomas and Lily arguing about something. The sound almost normal, almost whole. "They're starting to trust me," Clara said. "Thomas doesn't run away anymore. Lily smiled yesterday when I braided her hair." "I know." Ethan's voice carried something warm. "You're good with them, better than I hoped. They're good children. They just—" She stopped, started again. "They just need to know someone will stay. That's all any of us need, really. To know that when things get hard, the people who matter won't leave." Ethan was quiet for a long moment. Then, "Sarah used to say that, about staying being the hardest and most important thing." It was the first time he'd said his late wife's name in Clara's presence. She felt the weight of it, the trust implicit in sharing that grief. "She was right," Clara said softly. "Leaving is easy. Staying takes everything you have." "Yeah." He cleared his throat, stepping back, letting the moment settle. "I should check on the children. Make sure Thomas isn't filling Lily's head with wild stories about Blackwood being a cattle rustler or some such." Clara almost smiled. "He probably is." "Probably." Ethan headed for the stairs, then paused. "Clara, thank you for not running when you had the chance. I promised I was the staying type, remember?" "You did." He looked at her once more, something shifting in his expression. Gratitude, maybe, or the first fragile threads of something deeper. Then he was gone, and Clara was alone in the kitchen with her racing heart and trembling hands, and the knowledge that she'd just survived the test she'd been dreading since the moment she arrived. She'd been offered up as second best, compared and found wanting, held up against beauty and refinement and lost by every objective measure. And Ethan Cole had chosen her anyway. Not because he didn't see her flaws, not because he was settling, but because he'd looked at her, really looked, and seen something worth keeping. Clara pressed her hands flat on the table, grounding herself. Through the window, she could see the endless Wyoming sky, the grassland rolling toward mountains, the cattle moving like slow water across the land. So much space, so much possibility. Maybe she could stay. Maybe she could build something here that looked like redemption, felt like home. Maybe the wrong girl really could become the right one. One day at a time, one choice at a time, one moment of staying when leaving would be easier. She took a breath, then another. Then she started preparing supper because that's what staying looked like. Not grand gestures or perfect moments, but the simple, endless work of showing up. The children would be hungry soon. Ethan would come in tired and dusty and needing something solid to eat. And Clara would be here. Not because she had nowhere else to go, but because this broken, healing, complicated mess of a family was exactly where she was meant to be. Even if she didn't deserve it, even if it scared her, even if her past was still waiting to surface and destroy everything. For now, she'd stay, and that would have to be enough. 3 weeks passed like water finding its level. Not smooth, never easy, but settling into something that resembled a life. Clara learned the particular creak of the third stair that meant Thomas was sneaking down for water in the night. Learned which of Lily's silences meant fear and which meant she was simply thinking. Learned the way Ethan's shoulders dropped when he came in from a hard day and found supper waiting and children who weren't crying. She learned, too, the shape of her own days, how her hands no longer ached from the work, how she'd stopped flinching at every sound expecting judgment, how sometimes she'd catch herself humming while she kneaded bread and realized she was almost content. Almost. The fear never left entirely. It lived in her chest like a sleeping animal, waiting. Every time a rider approached the ranch, every time Ethan went to town for supplies, every time she saw him reading a letter, that fear woke and bared its teeth. They'll find out. Someone will tell him. He'll know what you are. But the days kept coming, and the fear kept waiting, and Clara kept staying. She was scrubbing the kitchen floor when Lily came running in, breathless and flushed with excitement. Miss Clara! Miss Clara! Papa says the Reverend's coming tomorrow for Sunday service, and we have to make the house nice, and can we bake something special? Clara sat back on her heels, pushing hair from her face. The Reverend comes here? Not to church. We're too far. He rides out to the ranches once a month. Lily bounced on her toes. Mama always made cinnamon rolls. Papa loved them. Can we make cinnamon rolls? The mention of Sarah still came like that, sudden and sharp. A reminder that Clara was living in the shape of someone else's life, trying to fill a space that wasn't meant for her. But Lily's face was so hopeful, so open, that Clara couldn't bear to disappoint her. We'll need to start the dough tonight so it can rise, she said. Think you can help me? Lily nodded so hard her braids bounced, and Clara felt that squeeze in her chest again, the dangerous warmth of attachment, of mattering to someone. She should guard against it. She should remember that this was temporary, that everything could shatter the moment truth came knocking. But Lily was already pulling out flour and sugar, chattering about how Mama had let her sprinkle the cinnamon, and Clara couldn't bring herself to step back from this moment of simple, precarious joy. That evening, they worked together in the lamplight, Lily's small hands clumsy but earnest as she helped knead the dough. Thomas watched from the doorway, pretending disinterest but inching closer until he was hovering at Clara's elbow, observing every movement. Mama used to let me taste the filling, he said finally, trying to sound casual. Did she? Clara held out the spoon with cinnamon and sugar clinging to it. Then you better make sure I got it right. Thomas took the spoon, his face doing something complicated, grief and memory and the tentative beginning of something that might, someday, be acceptance. He licked the spoon clean and nodded. "'S good. Maybe a little more cinnamon." "You heard the expert," Clara told Lily. "A little more cinnamon." Ethan came in while they were shaping the rolls, his shirt dusty and his face tired. He stopped in the doorway much like Thomas had, watching his children laughing over sticky dough, watching Clara show them how to roll it tight so the swirls would be even. Something shifted in his expression, not quite a smile, but close. "You're making Sarah's cinnamon rolls," he said quietly. Clara's hand stilled. "Lily wanted to. I hope I didn't mean to. It's good." His voice was rough. "It's right. Sarah would have wanted them to remember, to keep the good things alive." He cleared his throat. "Just like you said about the sourdough starter. Keep the good things going." Their eyes met across the kitchen, and Clara felt it again. That dangerous thread of connection, thin but growing stronger. She looked away first, focusing on the dough, on the mechanical motions of rolling and cutting that didn't require her to face whatever was building between them. The next morning, Clara woke before dawn to get the rolls in the oven. The house was still dark, silent except for the usual creaks and the sound of wind against the walls. She moved quietly, building up the fire, sliding the pan into the oven, setting coffee to boil. The familiar rhythm settled her nerves. She could do this. She could manage a simple Sunday service. She could smile and nod and be unremarkable enough that no one would look too closely. She was pouring her first cup of coffee when Ethan's door opened. He emerged fully dressed, his hair damp from washing, and something about seeing him in his good shirt, the one without patches, the one he saved for town, made Clara suddenly aware of her own appearance. Her oldest dress, her hair hastily pinned, flour probably still dusting her sleeves from last night. "Coffee's ready," she said, keeping her voice level. "Rolls should be done in about 20 minutes. Ethan poured himself a cup and leaned against the counter, studying her. "You're nervous." It wasn't a question. Clara wrapped her hands around her own cup, using the heat to ground herself. "I don't know what to expect. The Reverend, will he ask questions? About me?" "Probably." Ethan took a long swallow of coffee. "Reverend Matthews is a good man. but he's also the biggest gossip in 3 counties. Anything you tell him will be all over Wyoming territory by next Sunday." Clara's stomach dropped. "Then what should I say?" "The truth, I figure. You came west answering an advertisement. You're helping with the children and the household. He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "We're figuring things out as we go. And if he asks about marriage, about whether we're—" She couldn't finish the sentence. "He'll ask." Ethan set his cup down. "And I'll tell him we're taking things slow, making sure it's right for the children. That's honest enough without being anybody's business but ours." The rolls came out perfect, golden and fragrant, oozing cinnamon and sugar. Lily clapped her hands, and Thomas actually smiled, and when they all sat down to eat one before the Reverend arrived, Clara felt something almost like peace. It lasted exactly as long as it took for the sound of hoofbeats to echo across the yard. Reverend Matthews was a thin man with kind eyes and a voice that carried more authority than his slight frame suggested. He swept in like he owned the place, greeting Ethan warmly, exclaiming over how big the children had grown, and then turning his full attention to Clara. "And you must be Miss Bennett," he said, taking her hand with both of his. "Ethan's letter mentioned you'd arrived. What a blessing for these children to have a woman's care again." Clara murmured something appropriate, trying not to notice how thoroughly he was examining her, cataloging every detail to share later over coffee and speculation. They gathered in the front room, the best furniture dusted and arranged, Lily pressed against Clara's side and Thomas sitting stiff and formal beside his father. The Reverend led them through hymns and scripture, his voice filling the small space with practiced cadence. Clara mouthed the words, her mind elsewhere, waiting for the moment she knew was coming. It came after the final prayer, when the Reverend accepted coffee and a cinnamon roll and settled himself comfortably into interrogation. "So, Miss Bennett, Ethan tells me you're from Boston. That's quite a journey to undertake. What brought you all the way to Wyoming?" Clara had prepared for this. "I was working in a factory. The conditions were difficult, and I had no family remaining in Boston. When I saw the advertisement for a position helping with children on a ranch, it seemed like an opportunity for a fresh start." "A fresh start." The Reverend nodded thoughtfully. "And how are you finding ranch life? Quite different from Boston, I imagine." "Very different, but good different." Clara chose her words carefully. "The work is hard, but it's honest. And the children—" She glanced at Lily, who was watching her with solemn eyes. "They're wonderful." "Mama used to make cinnamon rolls too," Lily said suddenly. "Just like these. Miss Clara learned the recipe, and she lets us help." Something softened in the Reverend's face. "That's good, child. That's very good. Your mother would be glad to know her traditions are being honored." He turned back to Clara. "Sarah Cole was a remarkable woman. She had a gift for making people feel welcome, for seeing the best in everyone. It's a hard legacy to live up to." The words were kind, but Clara heard the warning underneath. "Don't think you can replace her. Don't presume too much." "I'm not trying to replace her," Clara said quietly. "I couldn't if I wanted to. I'm trying to help where help is needed." "And we're grateful for it," Ethan said firmly. "Clara's been a blessing to this household. The children are thriving, the house is running smoothly, and we're—" He paused, and Clara felt his gaze on her. "We're finding our way together." The Reverend's eyebrows rose slightly. "Together? I see. And might we expect to hear wedding bells in the near future?" Clara's breath caught. This was it, the moment when everything would become official or fall apart entirely. She waited for Ethan to deflect, to sidestep, to keep things vague and undefined. Instead, he said, "That's our intention, yes. We're taking time to make sure it's right for everyone involved, especially the children. But Clara's not going anywhere." The Reverend smiled. "Well then, congratulations are in order." He raised his coffee cup in a small toast. "Though I'll admit, Ethan, you might have mentioned this in your letter. Quite the surprise." "Didn't want it spread around until we were sure," Ethan said evenly. "Some things are private." Of course. But the Reverend's eyes gleamed with the satisfaction of someone who'd just acquired valuable information. "Still, the community will want to celebrate, perhaps a small gathering after the ceremony, nothing elaborate, just—" "No." Ethan's voice was flat. "When we marry, it'll be quiet, family only, no spectacle." The Reverend's smile faltered, Well, that's certainly your prerogative, though people will talk. Let them. Ethan stood, effectively ending the conversation. Thank you for the service, Reverend. Always appreciate you making the ride out here. It was a dismissal, polite but firm. The Reverend gathered his things with slightly ruffled dignity, made his farewells, and rode off with enough gossip to fuel a month of Sunday dinners. The moment he was out of sight, Clara turned to Ethan. You told him we're getting married. I did. But we never discussed. You never asked. Would you have said yes? Ethan's eyes were steady on hers. If I'd asked proper, with pretty words and romance, would you have agreed? Clara's mouth went dry. I don't know. Maybe. Probably. But that's not... You can't just announce, I can, and I did. He crossed his arms. Clara, we both know what this is. You need security, I need help, and the children need stability. Marriage makes sense for all those reasons, but more than that... He stopped, seemed to reconsider his words. You fit here. With us. And I don't want you thinking this is temporary, that you can be dismissed or replaced the minute something better comes along. Marriage makes that clear. To who? The Reverend? The neighbors? To you. His voice softened. So you know you're not just hired help. So you know you're choosing this as much as I am. Lily tugged on Clara's skirt. Does this mean you'll be our mama for real? The question hit Clara like a physical blow. She looked down at the little girl's hopeful face, at Thomas watching from across the room with carefully guarded eyes, at Ethan standing there offering her something she'd never dared to want. Permanence, belonging, a second chance at the family she'd lost. The word stuck. I can't replace your mother, Lily. I would never try. But you could stay, Lily insisted. You could be, not Mama, but Miss Clara, who stays forever. Right? Right, Thomas said from his corner, surprising everyone. That's what Papa means. You stay, your family. You don't leave even when things get hard. His young face was fierce. That's what marriage is, staying. Out of the mouths of children, Clara thought, comes the most devastating truth. Yes, she heard herself say, I can stay. Lily threw her arms around Clara's waist, and Thomas ducked his head but couldn't quite hide his small smile. And Ethan just nodded once, satisfied, settled, like something important had been decided. And Clara stood there in the center of this makeshift family, feeling the weight of promises she wasn't sure she could keep, and thought, this is where it all falls apart. This is where the past catches up and destroys everything. But not today. Today, she had children who wanted her to stay, and a man who'd just offered her his name, and cinnamon rolls cooling on the counter. Today, she would hold on to this moment and let tomorrow's destruction wait its turn. The week that followed felt like holding her breath underwater. Everything suspended, waiting, the pressure building. Ethan didn't mention marriage again, but it hung between them like weather before a storm. Clara went about her work with mechanical precision, trying not to think about wedding vows and permanent commitments and all the reasons she didn't deserve either. On Thursday, the post came. The ranch hand who rode to town weekly brought back a small bundle of letters and newspapers, dropping them on the kitchen table while Clara was churning butter. She barely glanced at them, ranch business, mostly, bills and correspondence about cattle prices. But one envelope caught her eye. Heavy paper, formal script, addressed to Ethan Cole. And in the corner, a return address that made her blood turn to ice. The Westward Matrimonial Society, Boston, Massachusetts. Her hand stilled on the butter churn. They'd written to Ethan, the agency that had arranged her passage, that knew her history, that had files on every desperate woman who'd ever walked through their doors. They'd written to him. Clara's mind raced. What had they said? What had they revealed? Did they routinely inform prospective husbands about the women they sent, providing full histories like livestock papers? Or was this something else? A bill? A confirmation? Routine business correspondence? She should leave it alone. It was Ethan's mail, his business, not hers to interfere with. But if they'd told him, if they'd written about her past... Clara's hands were shaking as she picked up the envelope. It was sealed, unread. She could steam it open, read it, know what was coming before Ethan did. She could prepare, plan, figure out what to say. Or she could run, right now. Pack her trunk and be gone before he came in from the range, before he read whatever poison that letter contained. "What are you doing?" Clara spun around, the envelope still in her hand. Thomas stood in the doorway, his eyes sharp and knowing. "I was just—" She stopped. Lying to this boy felt impossible. "I was being foolish." Thomas came closer, studying the envelope. "That's Papa's mail." "I know. You gonna read it?" "No." Clara set it back on the table carefully, like it might explode. "No, I'm not." "But you wanted to." It wasn't an accusation, just observation. Thomas tilted his head. "Why?" "Because I'm terrified," Clara wanted to say. "Because that letter might contain the truth about who I really am, and the truth will destroy everything. Because I've spent 10 years running from my past, and I'm so tired of running, but I don't know how to stop. Because sometimes we're afraid of things before we even know what they are," she said instead. "And fear makes us do foolish things." Thomas considered this. Lily's afraid of the dark, even though nothing bad's ever happened to her in the dark. I told her that's stupid, but Papa said fear don't have to make sense to be real. Your Papa's a wise man. He likes you. Thomas said it matter-of-factly, like commenting on the weather. He smiles more now. Not a lot, but some. And he don't drink as much coffee after supper, which means he's sleeping better. Clara's chest tightened. I'm glad. Me too. Thomas shoved his hands in his pockets. I don't want you to leave, Miss Clara, even if that letter says something bad. Even if... He stopped, struggling with words too big for 8 years old. Even if you're scared. Staying when you're scared is braver than staying when you're not. Before Clara could respond, he turned and ran out, leaving her alone with the butter churn and the letter and the terrible weight of a child's trust. She went back to churning. The letter stayed on the table, sealed and waiting. Ethan came in at sunset, dusty and tired as always. He washed up at the basin, drank half a cup of water standing at the sink, then noticed the mail. Clara watched from across the room while pretending not to watch, her heart hammering so hard she was sure he could hear it. He flipped through the stack, bills here, a letter there, the newspaper. His hand paused on the envelope from Boston. His brow furrowed slightly as he read the return address. Then he tossed it on the table and walked away. Clara stared. You're not going to read it? Ethan turned back, surprised. Right now? No, it's probably just confirming passage arrangements or some such. Can wait until after supper. But it's from the agency. Her voice came out thin, strained. They might have written something important. Clara? Ethan studied her face, reading things she couldn't hide. What do you think is in that letter? I don't know. But you're afraid of what it might say. She couldn't lie. Not to him, not anymore. Yes. Ethan was quiet for a long moment. Then he picked up the envelope, walked to the stove, and fed it to the fire. The paper caught instantly, curling black, the formal script disappearing into ash. Claire's breath stopped. Why would you? Because whatever they wrote doesn't matter. His voice was calm, certain. I know what I need to know about you. The rest is noise. But you don't. Clara's voice broke. You don't know. You don't know what I've done, what I am, the mistakes I've made. Then tell me. He said it again, like he had before, like it was the simplest thing in the world. If you need me to know, tell me. But don't let some agency that treats women like merchandise define who you are in my eyes. The words burned in Clara's throat, desperate to escape. But fear held them, and shame, and the bone-deep certainty that speaking truth out loud would shatter this fragile, impossible thing they were building. I can't, she whispered. Not yet. Ethan nodded slowly. All right. But Clara, when you're ready, when you trust me enough, I'll listen. And whatever you tell me, it won't change the fact that you're good to my children, that you work harder than anyone I've ever known, that you show up every single day, even when it's hard. He paused. That's what matters. That's what I'm choosing. Clara turned away, pretending she needed to check the biscuits in the oven, using the moment to wipe her eyes before tears could fall. That night, after the children were in bed and the house had settled into silence, Clara sat at the kitchen table with pen and paper. She'd written so many letters in her life, letters applying for positions, letters of apology, letters trying to explain the inexplicable. But this one felt different, final. She wrote to the only person who might understand, her younger sister Margaret, who'd married well in Boston and never quite forgiven Clara for the scandal that had touched their family by association. Dear Margaret, I'm writing to tell you that I'm going to marry. His name is Ethan Cole. He's a rancher in Wyoming Territory, and he has 2 children who need a mother. I know you'll think I'm being foolish, that a woman with my history has no business trying for respectability. You may be right, but I'm going to try anyway. I wanted you to know in case something happens, in case my past finds me out here. His name is Ethan Cole. The ranch is called 3 Pines, 2 hours' ride from the town of Clearwater, Wyoming Territory. If anyone comes asking, if anyone tries to find me, please don't tell them. Please let me have this one chance at something like happiness. I know you've always thought me weak, Margaret. You were probably right about that too. But I'm trying to be stronger. I'm trying to stay. Your sister, Clara. She sealed the letter and set it aside to mail next week. It wasn't much, a fragile lifeline, a final message in a bottle before going under for the 3rd time. But it was something. Claire was banking the fire for the night when Ethan came downstairs. He'd been putting the children to bed, reading them stories, tucking them in the way Sarah used to. He did it every night, this ritual of comfort and normalcy, and Clara had learned not to interfere. They're asking when we'll get married, he said without preamble. Lily wants a new dress. Thomas wants to know if he has to wear a tie. Clara's hand stilled on the poker. What did you tell them? That we'd figure it out together. He leaned against the doorframe. But I'm thinking sooner rather than later. Before winter sets in. Before the whole territory is talking about us living under one roof without vows. He paused. That bother you? Moving fast? Everything about this bothered her. The speed, the permanence, the fact that she was about to promise forever to a man who didn't know the worst of her. But what were her options? Go back to Boston and die slowly in a factory? Drift from town to town, always running, always afraid? Or stay here with these children who were starting to trust her, this man who looked at her like she was worth choosing, this life that felt almost like redemption? No, she said finally. It doesn't bother me. When? Next time Reverend Matthews comes through, 3 weeks. Ethan crossed the room, stopping close enough that she could smell dust and leather and honest work. Clara, I know this isn't what you dreamed of when you were a girl. No romance, no courtship, no pretty words. But I promise you this. I'll be faithful, I'll work hard, and I'll never raise a hand to you or make you regret staying. That enough? It was more than she'd ever hoped for, more than she deserved. Yes, Clara whispered, that's enough. He nodded once, satisfied, and turned to head back upstairs. At the doorway, he paused. For what it's worth, I think you're braver than you know. Coming all the way out here, staying when things got hard, being patient with children who aren't easy to love right now. His voice softened. Sarah would have liked you, I think, would have appreciated how you honor her memory while making your own place here. Then he was gone, leaving Clara alone in the firelight with tears streaming down her face and 3 weeks to figure out how to deserve the life he was offering. 3 weeks to decide if she'd tell him the truth or carry her secrets into marriage like hidden rot that would eventually destroy them both. 3 weeks before she became Clara Cole and buried Clara Bennett forever. The old Clara, the ruined one, the girl who'd loved unwisely and paid for it with her son and her future and every piece of dignity she'd ever possessed. That Clara would die in 3 weeks. Had to die. Because Mrs. Cole couldn't have that history, couldn't carry that shame. Mrs. Cole would be clean and new and worthy of the children who called her name and the man who'd chosen her against all reason. Clara banked the fire completely and went to bed. But sleep was a long time coming, and when it finally came, she dreamed of a baby's cry she'd heard only once but would remember until the day she died. Tomorrow she would get up and make breakfast and pretend everything was fine. Tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow until the wedding came and the choice was made and there was no going back. She would stay. She would try. She would be good enough or die trying. That would have to be enough for all of them. The letter arrived on a Tuesday, 2 weeks before the wedding, carried by the same ranch hand who'd delivered the one Ethan had burned. Clara was alone in the kitchen making preserves when he knocked. his weathered face apologetic. Sorry to disturb, Miss Bennett. This came for you special, marked urgent. Her hands went numb. The jar she'd been holding slipped, shattering on the floor in an explosion of glass and strawberries. She stared at the envelope he held out. Thin paper, careful script, a Boston postmark. Margaret had written back. You all right, ma'am? The ranch hand was looking at her with concern. Yes. Thank you. Clara took the letter with fingers that didn't feel like her own. I'll clean this up. He tipped his hat and left. Clara stood in the wreckage of broken glass and ruined preserves, holding the letter like it might bite. Through the window, she could see Ethan in the distance, working with the horses. See Thomas and Lily playing near the barn. Her almost family, her almost life. She opened the letter. Clara, I don't know what you expect me to say. Congratulations? That you fooled some poor rancher into thinking you're respectable? That you deserve happiness after what you did? But I'm writing because you need to know. Someone came asking about you 3 weeks ago. A private detective hired by the Haversham family. Yes, that Haversham family. Apparently their son, the one who ruined you, though you always claimed it was love, recently died. His wife was going through his papers and found letters. Old letters from when you were 17. Letters where you talked about the baby. The family wants answers. They want to know what happened to the child. Whether he lived, where he went, if there's some bastard grandson out there who might come seeking their money someday. The detective was very thorough in his questions, very interested in where you'd gone. I told him I didn't know, that we'd lost touch years ago. But Clara, he was persistent, and he had resources. If he's determined enough, he'll find you. And when he does, your rancher will learn exactly what kind of woman he's bringing into his home. I won't tell them where you are. Despite everything, you're still my sister. But I can't protect you forever. Whatever you're building out there in Wyoming, you should tell him the truth before someone else does. At least then you'll control the story. Margaret. The letter fluttered from Clara's hand. She stood frozen, her mind a white roar of panic. They were looking for her. The Haversham family, wealthy, powerful, vindictive, wanted answers about a child born 10 years ago and given up the same day. They'd hired a detective. They were searching. And when they found her, everything would be over. She thought of Ethan burning that agency letter without reading it, trusting her enough to let the past stay buried. She thought of Lily's small hand in hers, of Thomas calling her Miss Clara with something almost like affection, of the wedding dress she'd started sewing by lamplight, plain but clean and new, like the life she'd dared to hope for. All of it would burn to ash the moment the truth came out. Clara's legs gave way. She sank to the floor among the broken glass and strawberries, her dress soaking up the sticky mess, her whole body shaking. She'd been so stupid, so foolish to think she could outrun her past, that 3,000 miles and a new name would be enough. The past didn't care about distance. It came for you anyway. She was still sitting there when Lily found her. Miss Clara? The little girl's voice was high with worry. Miss Clara, you're bleeding! Clara looked down. Blood mixed with strawberry juice on her hands. She'd cut herself on the glass without noticing. Lily was already running, shouting for her father, her voice carrying panic across the yard. Ethan burst through the door seconds later, Thomas right behind him. He took in the scene, Clara on the floor, blood and glass and the letter lying in the mess, her face empty of everything but fear. Thomas, take your sister upstairs, he said quietly. Now. For once, Thomas didn't argue. He grabbed Lily's hand and pulled her away, though the little girl kept looking back with frightened eyes. Ethan crouched beside Clara, his hands gentle as he examined her cuts. These aren't deep. What happened? I dropped the jar. Her voice sounded distant, mechanical. Stupid. I was stupid. You're shaking. He reached past her for the letter, and Clara didn't stop him. What was the point? It was over anyway. Everything was over. He read it once, quickly, then again more slowly. When he looked up, his face was carefully blank. Who's the Haversham family? Clara laughed. A broken, bitter sound. Rich people from Boston. Old money. Their son went to Harvard and slummed in the factories for a summer. Thought it was romantic to seduce the poor girl making shirts for 50 cents a day. She wiped her bloody hands on her ruined dress. I was 17 and stupid enough to believe him when he said he loved me. And you had a child. A son. The word tore out of her. I had a son. For exactly 4 hours. They let me hold him once, and then they took him away. The matron at the home said he'd go to a good family, that I was doing the right thing, that a girl like me couldn't raise a child alone. Her voice turned bitter. She meant a ruined girl, a sinful girl, a girl who'd opened her legs for a man who promised marriage and delivered nothing but shame. Ethan was quiet for a long moment. And now they're looking for him. Not him, for answers, to make sure there's no inconvenient grandson who might appear someday wanting money or recognition. Clara's hands were shaking so hard she had to clench them into fists. The detective will find me, Ethan. Men like that always find what they're looking for. And when he does, when he tells the whole territory why I really came west, she couldn't finish, couldn't put words to the destruction that was coming. You think I'll send you away? It wasn't a question. Won't you? Clara looked at him then, really looked. You're about to marry a woman who's not fit to raise children because she gave her own away, who's ruined, used goods, the kind of woman men don't bring home unless they don't know what she is. Is that what you think? Ethan's voice was dangerously quiet. That I want you gone? You should want that, any decent man would. He stood abruptly, pacing to the window and back. Clara watched him, waiting for the rejection, the disgust, the inevitable moment when he'd realize his mistake and correct it. Instead, he crouched in front of her again, and when he spoke, his voice was rough, but not unkind. Let me tell you about my wife, my first wife, Sarah, the one everyone thinks was perfect. Clara's breath caught. Ethan never talked about Sarah, not like this. Sarah wasn't born in Wyoming, he continued. She came from a farm in Nebraska. Her father was a drunk who beat her mother and used his daughters worse. By the time Sarah was 16, she was desperate enough to run. She made it to Omaha, worked in a saloon for 6 months doing things she never wanted to talk about, saved every penny she could, and finally bought passage to Wyoming to start over. He paused, his jaw tight. I met her in Clearwater. She was working as a seamstress, living in a tiny room above the shop, keeping to herself because she knew what people would say if they knew her history. I fell in love with her anyway, married her anyway. And you know what the good people of this territory did when they found out where she'd come from? Clara shook her head mutely. They talked. They whispered. They called her names behind her back and sometimes to her face. Said I was a fool for marrying a whore. Said any children we had would be tainted. Said she'd run off or cheat on me or go back to her old ways. His voice turned fierce. And Sarah held her head up and lived her life anyway. She loved me and our children. She made this house a home, and she proved every single one of those bastards wrong, just by staying and being good and refusing to be ashamed of surviving. Clara's eyes burned. I didn't know. Nobody knows. Not even Thomas and Lily. They're too young to understand, and it's not a story they need yet. Ethan reached out, tilting her chin up so she had to meet his eyes. But you need it. You need to know that I married a woman with a past before. And I'd do it again. Because what matters isn't what was done to you when you were 17 and powerless. What matters is who you are now, what you choose now. I gave up my baby, Clara whispered. I let them take him, and I didn't fight. You were 17, alone and powerless, Ethan said flatly. What were you supposed to do? Storm the gates of wherever they took him? Raise him on the streets? You did what you had to do to survive, Clara. That's not sin. That's strength. The tears came then, hot and unstoppable, 10 years of grief and shame pouring out. Ethan pulled her up from the floor, away from the glass and blood and ruined preserves, and held her while she broke apart. He didn't say it would be all right. He didn't make promises he couldn't keep. He just held her, steady and solid, while everything she'd been holding together finally shattered. When the storm finally passed, Clara pulled back, wiping her face with shaking hands. The detective will still find me. The story will still come out. Maybe. Ethan's voice was grim. But if it does, we'll face it together, as husband and wife. He paused. That is, if you still want to marry me. I'd understand if... Yes. The word came out fierce, desperate. Yes, I want to marry you. I want to stay. I want... Her voice broke. I want to be Clara Cole and put Clara Bennett in the ground where she belongs. Something shifted in Ethan's expression, relief maybe, or something deeper. Then we do it now, today. Clara stared at him. What? We don't wait 2 more weeks for the Reverend. We ride into town today and find someone who can marry us legal, justice of the peace, town clerk, whoever will do it. His jaw set with determination. That way when the detective comes, if he comes, you're my wife, not some woman living in my house. My wife. And anyone who wants to talk about your past will have to go through me first. Ethan, you don't have to. I know I don't have to. He cupped her face in his rough hands. I want to. Clara, I've been half alive for 2 years, just going through motions trying to keep my children from drowning while I drowned right alongside them. And then you came, and you stayed, and you fought for us even when we gave you nothing but hard in return. His thumb brushed away a lingering tear. You think I'm doing you some kind of favor by marrying you? You're saving us, all 3 of us. Clara couldn't speak past the lump in her throat. She just nodded, once, and that was enough. They told the children over lunch, sitting around the kitchen table, that Clara had scrubbed clean of broken glass and strawberries. Lily's face lit up like Christmas morning. Thomas looked suspicious. Why now? The boy asked. Why today instead of when the Reverend comes? Ethan didn't lie to them. He never had. Because sometimes life doesn't go according to plan, and you have to adjust. Miss Clara and I decided we don't want to wait anymore. Is it because of the letter? Thomas's eyes were too knowing. The one that made Miss Clara cry? Clara's breath caught. She'd thought the children hadn't seen, hadn't known. But Thomas saw everything, cataloged everything, protected his family the only way an 8-year-old could, by paying attention. Partly, she said quietly. The letter had some difficult news, but Thomas, your father's right. We don't want to wait. We want to be a family now, today. If that's all right with you. Thomas studied her face for a long moment. Then he looked at his father. Papa, you promise she's staying? Even if the news gets worse? Even if people talk? I promise, Ethan said firmly. Clara's not going anywhere. Not today, not tomorrow, not ever, unless she chooses to leave on her own. And you won't leave? Thomas asked Clara directly. Even if it gets hard? Clara thought of everything she'd run from in her life. The shame in Boston, the whispers, the jobs that let her go when they learned her history, the endless string of places where she'd never quite belonged. She thought of the baby she'd held for 4 hours 10 years ago, the son she'd never stopped mourning, the piece of her heart that was still missing and always would be. And then she looked at Thomas with his fierce protectiveness, and Lily with her hopeful eyes, and Ethan with his quiet strength, and she made the only promise she'd ever been certain she could keep. I won't leave, she said, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. I promise. Thomas nodded slowly. Okay then. Okay? Lily bounced in her chair. We're getting married today? Can I wear my Sunday dress? Can Thomas give you away like in the stories? Clara almost laughed, the first laugh she'd managed since seeing that letter. I'd be honored if Thomas would give me away. The boy's face did something complicated, pleasure and embarrassment warring for dominance. I guess I could, he muttered, if you really want. I really want. They left within the hour. Ethan drove the wagon with Clara beside him, both children in the back chattering about weddings and family and what they should call Clara now. Mrs. Cole seemed too formal. Mama felt wrong when Sarah's memory was still so fresh. In the end, Lily decided on Mama Clara, and Thomas grudgingly agreed it would do. The ride to Clearwater took 2 hours over roads that were more suggestion than actual path. Clara used the time to compose herself, to push down the fear and focus on what was in front of her. She was getting married today. Married. To a good man who knew her worst secret and wanted her anyway. It felt like a dream, or a lie, or both. The town was small, barely more than a main street with buildings clustered around it like chicks around a hen. Ethan pulled up in front of a whitewashed building with a sign that read Justice of the Peace, Samuel Brennan. You sure about this? He asked Clara quietly while Thomas helped Lily down from the wagon. No, Clara said honestly, but I'm sure about you, about them. That's enough. They went inside. Justice Brennan was a portly man with kind eyes and ink-stained fingers who didn't ask questions when Ethan explained what they needed. He pulled out the necessary forms, had them sign where indicated, and called in his wife to serve as witness along with Thomas and Lily. The ceremony itself took less than 5 minutes. No flowers, no music, no guests. Just simple words about commitment and faithfulness. About choosing each other in good times and bad. When Brennan asked if Clara took Ethan to be her lawfully wedded husband, her voice didn't shake. "I do." And when Ethan slipped a plain gold band on her finger, Sarah's ring, Clara realized with a start, the one he'd been saving, she felt the weight of it like an anchor. Holding her down or holding her steady, she wasn't sure which. "I now pronounce you man and wife," Brennan said with satisfaction. "You may kiss your bride, Mr. Cole." Ethan looked at Clara, something uncertain in his eyes. She nodded, just barely, and he leaned in and pressed his lips to hers. Brief, chaste, more promise than passion, but real. Undeniably real. They were married. Clara Bennett was dead. Clara Cole was born. They signed the papers, paid the fee, and walked back out into the afternoon sunlight as a family. Legal, official, bound together by words and signatures, and a gold band that caught the light. "Can we get penny candy?" Lily asked, practical even in the midst of momentous occasions. "Since we're in town?" Ethan laughed, actual laughter, warm and surprised. "Yeah, sweetheart, we can get candy." They spent the next hour making small purchases, candy for the children, coffee and flour for Clara, a new bridle for Ethan. Normal things, ordinary things, the kind of errands any married couple might run on a Thursday afternoon. And slowly, the tight knot of fear in Clara's chest began to loosen. She was married. She wore a ring. She had a family and a home and a name that was hers by law, not charity. Whatever came next, whatever the detective found, whatever whispers followed her, she would face it as Clara Cole. Not alone, not powerless. The fear would come back, she knew. But for now, walking down Clearwater's dusty main street with her new husband and children, she let herself feel something almost like peace. They were loading supplies into the wagon when a voice called out across the street. "Ethan Cole! That really you?" Clara turned to see a woman approaching, middle-aged, well-dressed, with the confident bearing of someone used to being heard. Ethan's expression went carefully neutral. "Mrs. Patterson, didn't expect to see you in town today." "Wednesday's my shopping day, you know that." The woman's eyes swept over Clara with undisguised curiosity. "And who might this be?" "My wife," Ethan said flatly. "Clara, this is Judith Patterson. She owns the general store. Mrs. Patterson, my wife Clara Cole." The woman's eyebrows shot up. "Wife? My goodness, Ethan, you work fast. I heard you'd taken in some woman from back east to help with the children, but I had no idea." She caught herself, smile turning calculating. "Well, congratulations, I suppose, though I must say it does seem rather sudden." "We wanted a quick ceremony," Clara said, keeping her voice level. "No fuss. How practical." Mrs. Patterson's gaze dropped to Clara's plain dress, her work-worn hands, the lack of any wedding finery. "Though I do think the community would have appreciated being invited. We do love a celebration, and poor Sarah was so beloved. It would have been nice to—" "Sarah's been gone 2 years," Ethan interrupted, his voice hard. "And this is my second wife, not a replacement for my first. I'd appreciate it if people remembered that." Mrs. Patterson's smile went brittle. "Of course, I meant no offense. I'm simply saying that people will talk, Ethan. They'll wonder about the haste, about where this woman came from." "Let them wonder." Ethan put his hand on Clara's back, proprietary and protective. "Good day, Mrs. Patterson." He guided Clara toward the wagon, the children scrambling up behind them. As they pulled away, Clara could see Mrs. Patterson already heading toward a knot of women gathered outside the dress shop, no doubt ready to share the scandalous news. "I'm sorry," Ethan said quietly. "Should have known we'd run into someone." "It's all right." Clara surprised herself by meaning it. "We always knew people would talk. At least now they're talking about Mrs. Cole, not some nameless woman of questionable morals." "You're not of questionable morals." "I was. To them, I still am." She looked down at the ring on her finger. "But maybe that matters less now."
They rode home in comfortable silence, the children dozing in the back as the sun began its slow descent. Clara watched the landscape roll past and thought about new names and old secrets and the strange mercy of second chances. That night, after the children were in bed and the house had settled into darkness, Clara stood in what had been the guest room and was now, officially, the master bedroom. Ethan had insisted married couples shared a room, he'd said, no matter how the marriage started. It was expected, proper. But he'd also moved a blanket and pillow to the chair by the window. "I'll sleep there," he'd said, "until you're ready for different, however long that takes." Now Clara sat on the edge of the bed in her nightgown, listening to him move around the room in the darkness, giving her privacy while they shared the same space. It was strange and awkward and surprisingly tender, this man trying to give her both marriage and safety, both commitment and space. "Ethan?" Her voice was quiet in the darkness. "Yeah?" "Thank you. For today. For all of it." She heard him settle into the chair, heard the rustle of the blanket. "Nothing to thank me for. We're family now. That's what family does." Family. The words settled over Clara like a blessing and a burden both. She lay down, pulling the quilt up, and stared at the ceiling. Somewhere in Boston, a detective was searching for a girl who no longer existed. Somewhere in this territory, people were already spreading stories about the hasty marriage and the mysterious Eastern woman. Somewhere in Clara's past, a 10-year-old boy was living a life she'd never be part of, growing up without knowing his mother had held him once and loved him forever. But here, in this room, in this house, on this ranch, at the edge of everything, here she was, Clara Cole, wife, almost mother, woman choosing to stay. It would have to be enough. It would be enough. She closed her eyes and let sleep come, and for the first time in 10 years she didn't dream of her lost son. She dreamed of tomorrow, and the day after, and all the tomorrows stretching ahead like an open road she'd finally found the courage to walk. The detective came 6 weeks later, on a cold October morning when the first snow was threatening in the mountains. Clara was kneading bread when she saw the unfamiliar horse approaching, a fine animal, too fine for a casual visitor. Her hand stilled in the dough, her heart climbing into her throat. She didn't call for Ethan, didn't run, just wiped her hands clean and walked to the door, opening it before the man could knock. He was younger than she'd expected, well-dressed in a city suit that looked absurd against the Wyoming landscape. His eyes were sharp, calculating, the kind that missed nothing. "Mrs. Cole?" He removed his hat. "My name is Daniel Webster. I'm a private investigator from Boston, and I'd like to ask you a few questions about your past." Clara's voice came out steady despite the fear clawing at her insides. "I assumed you'd find me eventually. Mr. Haversham is very thorough, I imagine." Webster's eyebrows rose slightly. "You know why I'm here, then?" "My sister wrote to warn me. Come in, Mr. Webster. If we're going to discuss ancient history, we might as well be civilized about it." She led him into the kitchen, poured coffee she'd just made, and sat across from him at the table where she'd fed her family breakfast an hour ago, where she'd promised Lily they'd make sugar cookies later, where Thomas had grudgingly admitted his arithmetic was getting easier with her help. "Where's your husband?" Webster asked, pulling out a small notebook. "Working. He'll be back soon enough." Clara wrapped her hands around her own coffee cup. "Ask your questions, Mr. Webster. I'm not running from this." He studied her for a moment, as if recalibrating his approach. "Very well. 10 years ago, you gave birth to a son at the Mercy Home for Unwed Mothers in Boston. The father was recorded as unknown, but we have reason to believe it was Jonathan Haversham, Jr. "It was. No point denying it now. He told me he loved me, that we'd marry after he finished at Harvard, that his family would accept me once they saw how devoted we were." Clara's laugh was bitter. "I was 17 and stupid enough to believe him." "And the child?" "Taken 4 hours after birth. I was told he'd go to a good family, that I'd done the right thing, that a girl in my position couldn't possibly raise a child alone." The old grief rose up, familiar as breathing. "I never even knew his name. The family they gave him to, whoever they were supposed to change it anyway." Webster made notes, his pen scratching across paper. The Haversham family wants to know what became of the child, whether he's alive, where he is now. Mrs. Haversham, Jonathan's widow, is quite insistent. Why? Clara's voice sharpened. Jonathan's dead. What does it matter now? Jonathan left a substantial estate. If there's a legitimate heir, there's nothing legitimate about a bastard born to a factory girl, Clara interrupted. You know that. I know that. The Havershams certainly know that. Nevertheless, Webster flipped a page, they want answers, and they're prepared to be generous if you cooperate. The word hung in the air like bait on a hook.
Clara thought about the ranch, about how hard Ethan worked, about the lean years and tight money and all the things that cash could ease. She thought about what generous might mean to a family like the Havershams, enough to secure Thomas's and Lily's futures, to expand the ranch, to stop worrying about every penny. Then she thought about the price of that generosity. The strings attached, the way powerful families collected debts and called them in when convenient. I don't have any answers to give you, she said quietly. The matron at the home handled the adoption. I signed papers. I was told I had to, that it was legal requirement, but I never saw where the child went. Never knew the family's name. I was unconscious from laudanum when they took him, and when I woke, he was gone. But you could try to find out. The records might still exist. No. Clara's voice turned to iron. I gave up my son 10 years ago because I had no choice. I won't disturb his life now because his father's family suddenly developed a conscience or a concern about their legacy. That boy, whoever he is, wherever he is, he has a family. People who've raised him, loved him, given him everything I couldn't. I won't destroy that for money or answers or to satisfy the curiosity of people who never cared about him in the first place. Webster leaned back, reassessing. The Havershams could make your life difficult, Mrs. Cole. They have resources, connections. If you're not cooperative... The door opened. Ethan stood there, Thomas beside him, both of them dusty from morning work. Ethan's eyes went from Clara to Webster, reading the situation instantly. You must be the detective, he said flatly. Wondered when you'd show up. Webster stood, offering his hand. Daniel Webster, I'm here on behalf... I know who you're here for. Ethan ignored the offered hand. And I'll tell you what my wife just did. We're not interested in your employer's money or their questions. The child Clara gave up 10 years ago deserves to live his life in peace. We won't help you find him. Mr. Cole, I understand your protective instinct, but this is a legal matter. No, it's not. Ethan moved to stand beside Clara, his hand resting on her shoulder. It's a rich family trying to ease their guilt or protect their fortune, and they're willing to tear apart a 10-year-old boy's life to do it. We won't be part of that. Webster's expression hardened. The Havershams could pursue this through the courts, force the adoption records open. They have the resources and the determination. Let them try. Clara stood, drawing strength from Ethan's solid presence beside her. I gave up my legal rights to that child the day he was born. I have no claim on him, and neither do the Havershams. Jonathan never acknowledged the pregnancy, never provided support, never even admitted the child was his. His family has no legal standing, and any judge with sense will see this for what it is, a wealthy family trying to control a situation that's no longer theirs to control. You seem very certain of that, Webster observed. I've had 10 years to think about it, Clara said quietly. 10 years to live with what I did, to accept it, to understand that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is let go. Her voice strengthened. I let go. The Havershams need to do the same. Webster gathered his papers slowly, his expression unreadable. I'll relay your position to my employers, but Mrs. Cole, you should know, Jonathan's widow found letters. Love letters you wrote, talking about the baby, about wanting to keep him. She's quite sympathetic, actually, thinks you were wronged, that you deserve to know what happened to your son. The words hit Clara like a fist. She'd written those letters in the maternity home, desperate and scared and grieving, pouring out her heart to a man who'd never responded. She'd thought they were lost, destroyed, forgotten, like everything else from that terrible year. Mrs. Haversham's sympathy comes 10 years too late, Clara managed. And if she truly cared about what I deserve, she'd leave me in peace to build the life I have now. Thomas, who'd been silent until now, stepped forward. His young face was fierce. You need to leave. Miss Clara, Mama Clara, she's ours now. She doesn't belong to you or those Boston people. She belongs here. Webster looked at the boy, something shifting in his expression. You care about her very much, don't you? She's my mother, Thomas said simply. Not the one who birthed me, but the one who stays. That's what matters. The detective's pen stilled. What did you say? Ethan's hand tightened on Clara's shoulder. When he spoke, his voice carried a warning. My children are adopted, Mr. Webster, both of them. Their birth parents couldn't or wouldn't keep them, so my late wife and I took them in. Gave them our name, our home, our love. They're ours in every way that matters. Webster stared at Thomas, then at Lily, who'd appeared in the doorway. His face did something complicated, surprise, understanding, and what might have been respect. I see, he said slowly. That's quite remarkable, actually. He closed his notebook. Mrs. Cole, if I may, have you told your children about your son, about what happened to you? No, Clara's voice was firm. That's my grief to carry, not theirs. They know I understand loss, that I know what it means to be separated from someone you love. That's enough. Is it? Webster challenged. Because from where I'm standing, you've built a life that mirrors exactly what you couldn't give your own child. A home, a family, parents who choose to stay. That seems like more than coincidence. The observation cut too close to truths Clara barely admitted to herself. Yes, she'd chosen this. Chosen children who needed a mother, chosen to give them what she couldn't give her son. Chosen to pour all the love she'd had nowhere to put into Thomas and Lily and this broken family that was slowly healing. Maybe it's not coincidence, she said quietly. Maybe it's penance or redemption or just the universe's way of giving me a second chance to get it right. She met Webster's eyes. But whatever it is, it's mine. My choice, my family, my life. The Havershams don't get to take that from me. Webster was quiet for a long moment. Then he tucked his notebook away and picked up his hat. I'll tell them you're not interested in cooperation. I'll also tell them that the woman I found here is nothing like the scared 17-year-old girl from their son's letters, that you've built something good and solid and worth protecting. He paused at the door. For what it's worth, Miss Cole, I think you made the right choice 10 years ago. And I think you're making the right choice now. Wait, Clara's voice stopped him. The letters Mrs. Haversham found, what will she do with them? I don't know. That's not my decision. Tell her, Clara drew a breath. Tell her I hope she and Jonathan were happy, that I'm glad he had someone who loved him enough to care about an old secret. And tell her that wherever my son is, I hope he's happy too. That's all I want. That's all I've ever wanted. Webster nodded once. Then he was gone, riding away toward Clearwater, and the train that would take him back to Boston, and a world Clara no longer belonged to. The kitchen was silent after he left. Thomas moved to Clara's side, his hand finding hers. Lily came from the doorway and wrapped her arms around Clara's waist, and Ethan stood behind her, solid as the mountains, letting her lean back into his strength. Is he going to come back? Lily asked, her voice small. Is he going to take you away? No, sweetheart. Clara knelt so she was eye level with the little girl. I'm not going anywhere. This is my home. You're my family. That detective, he was looking for someone who doesn't exist anymore. The girl who wrote those letters, the girl who gave up her baby, she's gone. I'm Clara Cole now. I'm your Mama Clara, and nothing's going to change that. Promise? Lily's eyes were wide, frightened. I promise. Clara pulled both children close, feeling their warmth, their trust, the weight of their need, and her commitment. I'm staying, forever and always, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. Thomas's arms tightened around her. We'd fight for you, he said fiercely. If anyone tried to take you away, we'd fight. I know you would, Clara's voice was thick. But you don't have to. I'm not going anywhere. That night, after the children were finally settled in bed, After extra stories and reassurances and promises that morning would come, and Mama Clara would still be there, Clara and Ethan sat together in the kitchen. The lamp burned low between them, casting long shadows across the walls. "You all right?" Ethan asked. Clara thought about it, really thought. "Yes," she said, surprised to find it true. "I think I am." It was seeing him, saying those things out loud. It was hard, but also freeing somehow. Like I finally got to make a choice instead of having choices made for me. "You chose well." Ethan reached across the table, taking her hand. His thumb traced the gold band on her finger. "You chose us. Chose to stay and fight instead of running. I'm proud of you." The words broke something open in Clara's chest. She'd spent so long believing she was weak that giving up her son had been proof of her fundamental failure as a woman. But maybe there was strength in acknowledging what you couldn't change, in choosing to pour love into new vessels instead of mourning the ones you'd lost forever. "Ethan," she said quietly, "Thomas said something today about being adopted, about how Sarah took in children who needed homes." She did. Ethan's voice was gentle. "We couldn't have children of our own, something wrong with Sarah's body after the injuries her father caused. But she'd grown up in hell and survived it, and she wanted to give other children a different story. So we started taking in babies from the unwed mothers' homes, from women who couldn't keep them. Thomas came to us when he was 2 days old, Lily when she was 6 months. Clara's breath caught. "They don't know. Not yet. We planned to tell them when they were older, when they could understand, but maybe—" Ethan paused, searching for words. "Maybe it's time. Maybe knowing their own story would help them understand yours. Help them see that families aren't just about blood. They're about who stays." That's what Thomas said. Almost those exact words. Clara's eyes burned. Who taught him that? Sarah. She used to say it all the time. Love is in the staying, not the starting. Ethan's voice roughened. She'd like you, Clara. She'd appreciate how you've honored her memory while making your own place here. How you've loved her children like they were always meant to be yours. They feel like mine, Clara whispered. Is that wrong? To love them like that when I don't have the right? You have every right. Ethan stood, coming around the table to pull her up and into his arms. You're their mother now. You've earned that through every meal you've cooked, every nightmare you've soothed, every moment you've shown up when it would have been easier to leave. That's what makes you their mother, not biology, choice. Yours and theirs. Clara buried her face against his shoulder and let herself cry. For the son she'd never see again, for the mother she'd become to children who weren't hers by birth, for the impossible grace of second chances and families built from broken pieces. And Ethan held her, this good man who'd chosen her despite everything, and waited until the storm passed. The next morning they sat the children down after breakfast. Thomas and Lily knew something important was happening. They could read it in the careful way Ethan and Clara arranged themselves at the table, in the serious set of their father's jaw. Are you leaving? Lily blurted, her eyes already filling with tears. No, sweetheart. Clara took the little girl's hand. Nobody's leaving, but your papa and I need to tell you something important, something about your own stories. Ethan took over, his voice steady but gentle. He told them about Sarah's childhood, about the horrors she'd survived, and the decision she'd made to save other children from similar fates. He told them about the adoption, about how they'd been chosen and wanted and loved from the very first moment. Thomas's face went through a dozen emotions: shock, confusion, hurt, and finally a kind of angry understanding. You lied to us. All this time you lied. We didn't lie, Ethan said firmly. We just didn't tell you everything yet. You're our children, Thomas. That's not a lie. That's the truest thing I know. But my real mother, Thomas's voice cracked. Where is she? Who is she? Clara spoke then, her voice soft but certain. Your real mother is the woman who raised you, who loved you, who sang you to sleep when you were scared and taught you right from wrong. Sarah was your real mother. Biology is just biology. It's nothing compared to love and time and choosing to stay. Like you chose to stay, Lily said slowly, understanding dawning, even though we're not your real children either.
You are my real children, Clara said fiercely. You're the children I choose every single day, the ones I love, the ones I worry about, the ones I'd fight the whole world to protect. That makes you mine in every way that matters. Thomas was quiet for a long time, his young face working through concepts too big for 8 years old. Finally, he looked up at Clara. That baby you had, the one the detective asked about, is that why you know how to? He stopped, struggling. Is that why you understand? Clara's throat closed. She nodded. Yes, I had a son, and I gave him up because I couldn't keep him safe, because I was 17 and alone and powerless. It's the worst thing that ever happened to me, Thomas. The thing I regret most in my whole life. But it taught me something important. What? His eyes were fierce, demanding honesty. That loving someone means wanting what's best for them, even when it breaks your heart, even when it costs you everything. Claire's voice strengthened. I gave up my son so he could have a better life than I could give him. Your birth mothers gave you up for the same reason. And now you're here, with us, building a life that's good and safe and full of people who love you. That's what matters. Not who started your story, but who's here for the middle and the end. Lily crawled into Clara's lap, tucking her head under Clara's chin. I'm glad you're here for our middle, she said softly, even if you couldn't be there for his. The simple grace of it broke Clara completely. She held Lily close and reached for Thomas, who came grudgingly, awkwardly, but came nonetheless. Ethan wrapped his arms around all of them, and they sat like that for a long time. A family built from loss and choice and the stubborn determination to love, despite every reason not to. Later, when the children were outside playing, Ethan found Clara at the kitchen window watching them. You did good, he said, telling them the truth, helping them understand. I hope so. Clara leaned into his warmth. It's strange, isn't it? How grief and grace get all tangled up sometimes. I lost my son and found yours. I gave up one family and built another. It doesn't erase the pain, but it redeems it, Ethan finished. Gives it meaning. Makes the suffering count for something. Yes. Clara turned to face him. Ethan, when we got married, you slept in the chair. You've been sleeping in the chair for 6 weeks. He went still. Didn't want to push, figured you'd let me know when you were ready for different. I'm ready. She said it simply, without drama or seduction. I'm your wife. You're my husband. I want... She paused, searching for words. I want all of it. The full marriage. The real partnership. I want to build this life with you completely, not with one foot still in the past. Something shifted in Ethan's expression. Heat and tenderness, and something deeper that Clara was just beginning to recognize as love. Not the desperate, foolish love of her 17-year-old self, but something steadier, stronger, built on respect and shared struggle and the daily choice to stay. Tonight then, he said quietly, we start the rest of our life, the real one. Clara nodded. Tonight. The weeks that followed settled into a rhythm that felt less like surviving and more like living. Clara woke each morning beside Ethan, his warmth steady and reassuring. She made breakfast while he did morning chores, taught the children their lessons after lunch, worked alongside him in the evenings preparing for winter. Small, ordinary moments that added up to something like happiness. The gossip from town reached them occasionally. Whispers about the hasty marriage, speculation about what Clara was hiding, questions about why such a plain woman had snagged a decent man. Clara learned to let it roll off her back. Let them talk. She had more important things to worry about than the opinions of strangers. In November, a letter came from Boston. Clara's hands shook as she opened it, but it wasn't from the detective or the Haversham family. It was from Margaret. Clara, the detective came back. He told the Havershams you wouldn't cooperate, that you'd built a new life and wanted to be left alone. Mrs. Haversham was furious at first, but then something strange happened. She came to see me, brought Jonathan's letters, the ones you wrote, said she'd been reading them, trying to understand what her husband had done. She asked me about you, about what happened after. I told her the truth, that you'd been destroyed by it, that you'd worked yourself to exhaustion in factories for years, that you'd finally fled west to escape the shame. She cried, Clara. This wealthy, powerful woman sat in my parlor and cried over what her husband did to you. And then she said something I never expected. The boy deserves to grow up in peace, and so does she. She's destroying the letters. All of them. The family won't pursue this further. You're free, Clara. Truly free. She asked me to tell you one more thing. She's sorry. Sorry her husband hurt you. Sorry his family didn't protect you. Sorry the world is so cruel to women and so forgiving to men. She said she hopes you find happiness in Wyoming. I hope so too. Despite everything, despite how angry I've been, you're still my sister, and you deserve happiness. Margaret Clara read the letter twice, 3 times, barely believing it. Free. She was free. The past wouldn't reach out and destroy her.
The Havershams wouldn't tear apart her son's life seeking answers that wouldn't change anything. She could simply be Clara Cole, wife and mother and woman, building a life in Wyoming without fear of destruction from Boston. She showed the letter to Ethan that night. He read it silently, then pulled her close. "It's over," he said. "Yes." Clara's voice was thick with relief and residual fear, and something that felt almost like forgiveness. Not for what had been done to her, but for her own perceived failures. "It's over." "How do you feel?" Clara thought about it, really thought. "Lighter," she said finally. "Like I've been carrying a weight for so long I forgot it was there, and suddenly it's gone. I can breathe all the way down." "Good." Ethan kissed her forehead. "You deserve that. You deserve to breathe." Winter came hard that year, snow piling high and wind screaming down from the mountains. They were trapped inside for days at a time, the 4 of them huddled close in the warmth of the house. Clara taught the children to read and write and figure numbers. Ethan taught them to play chess and told stories about his own childhood. They played games and sang songs and occasionally drove each other half mad with proximity. And through it all, they learned each other. The way Thomas pretended to be tough but cried at sad stories. How Lily was braver than she looked, willing to face her fears when it mattered. The way Ethan's silence wasn't coldness but thoughtfulness, and how his quiet praise meant more than anyone's loud approval. The way Clara's anxiety manifested in compulsive cleaning, and how she needed to talk through her fears to diffuse them. They learned to fight fair and forgive fast, to say sorry and mean it, to ask for what they needed instead of expecting the others to guess. They became, slowly and imperfectly, a family. On Christmas morning, Clara woke to find Ethan already up, building the fire. She came to stand beside him, wrapping her arms around his waist from behind. "Merry Christmas," she murmured. "Merry Christmas, wife." He turned, pulling her close. "You happy?" Clara thought about the girl she'd been a year ago, broken, scared, convinced she didn't deserve good things. She thought about the woman she was becoming, stronger, braver, learning to accept love instead of flinching from it. "Yes," she said, "I'm happy." The children thundered downstairs then, excited about the small gifts Clara and Ethan had managed, new books, candy, a doll for Lily, and a pocket knife for Thomas. Simple things, but given with love, received with joy. After breakfast, while the children played with their gifts, Ethan pulled Clara aside. "I have something for you," he said quietly. He handed her a small wooden box, hand-carved and polished smooth. Inside was a photograph. Not new, the edges worn but carefully preserved. A woman with kind eyes and a soft smile, holding a baby. Sarah, Clara realized. Sarah with infant Thomas. "I wanted you to have it," Ethan said, "so you'd know her, so she'd be part of this family, part of what we're building. She'd want that, I think. Would want the children to remember her, but also to love you. Both, not either or." Clara's eyes burned. She studied Sarah's face, the woman who'd come before her, who'd built this family from broken pieces, who'd taught her children that love was in the staying, the woman whose legacy Clara was trying to honor while carving out her own space. "Thank you," she whispered. "I'll treasure this." "There's more." Ethan drew a breath. "I want to tell you something I should have said weeks ago. Clara, I love you, not the way I loved Sarah. That was different. We grew up together, built everything from nothing. This is..." He struggled for words. "You came into our lives when we were drowning, and you didn't just save us. You became part of us. You're my partner, my friend, my wife in truth, and not just law." I love you, Clara. And I wanted you to know. The words hit Clara like sunlight breaking through clouds. She'd hoped, suspected, but hadn't dared to believe that this quiet, steady man could love her, broken, scarred, complicated her. I love you too, she said, the words coming easier than she'd expected. I didn't think I could, after everything. But I do. I love you and the children and this life we're building. I love, her voice caught. I love being chosen, being wanted, being home. Ethan kissed her then, deep and sure, and Clara kissed him back with everything she had, gratitude and passion and commitment and the fierce determination to make this work, to be worthy of this second chance. When they broke apart, Thomas was standing in the doorway, trying to look disgusted but unable to hide his small smile. You two are being mushy, he announced. Yes, Clara agreed, laughing. Yes, we are. It's weird. Get used to it, Ethan said, pulling Clara close. Your mother and I planned to be mushy for a very long time. Thomas wrinkled his nose but came forward anyway, drawn by the warmth and security of parents who loved each other and him. Lily followed, and soon they were all tangled together on the sofa, a knot of arms and laughter and belonging. Later that evening, when the children were finally asleep and the house was quiet, Clara stood at the window looking out at the snow-covered ranch. The mountains rose black against the star-filled sky, and the world felt enormous and full of possibility. Ethan came to stand beside her, his arm around her waist. What are you thinking? He asked. Clara thought about the question, thought about the girl she'd been, desperate and alone on a train platform, certain she was the wrong choice, the wrong woman, the one who'd be sent back the moment someone realized the mistake. She thought about the woman she was now, wife, mother, partner, in a life she'd helped build from grief and determination. I'm thinking, she said slowly, that maybe there's no such thing as the wrong person in the right place. Maybe we're all just broken pieces that fit together in ways we don't expect. Maybe, she paused, finding the right words. Maybe the wrong girl became the right woman by choosing to stay when staying was hardest. You did choose right, Ethan said quietly. And so did I. That day on the platform, when I looked at you and knew, that was the best choice I ever made. Clara leaned into his strength, feeling the gold band on her finger, the weight of promises kept and still being kept. She thought of her son, 10 years old now, living his own life with his own family. She hoped he was happy, hoped he was loved, hoped he never felt the holes in his history the way she felt the hole in her heart. But she also knew, with a certainty that came from hard-won wisdom, that love didn't diminish by being divided. She could love the son she'd lost and the children she'd found, could grieve one family and build another, could carry scars and still be whole. We should go to bed, she said finally. Morning comes early. It does. Ethan turned her to face him, his hands gentle on her face. But before we do, thank you, Clara, for coming west, for staying, for loving us even when we made it hard, for being exactly who you are. Thank you for choosing me, Clara whispered back, for seeing past what I couldn't give to what I could, for making me part of something good. They went upstairs together, husband and wife in truth, partners in the great work of building a life. And if Clara paused at the children's rooms to check on them, to see Thomas sprawled in sleep with his new knife on the nightstand, to tuck Lily's quilt more snugly around her small shoulders, well, that was what mothers did. She was a mother, not perfect, not without scars, not unmarked by grief, but present, choosing, staying. And in the morning, she would wake beside her husband and make breakfast for her children and continue the work of living, not perfectly, but honestly, not without pain, but with purpose, not erasing the past, but building a future that honored both grief and grace. The wrong girl had come to Wyoming on a train full of fear and desperation. But Clara Cole, wife, mother, woman who'd learned that staying was its own kind of courage, she was exactly right, exactly where she belonged, exactly who she was meant to become. And that, finally, was enough. Years later, when people asked how Clara and Ethan met, she would smile and say simply, "He ordered exactly what he needed, and I arrived exactly when he needed it. Everything else was just details." And Ethan would add, his hand finding hers, I ordered right. It became their story, worn smooth with retelling. The children would roll their eyes at the familiar words, but smile anyway, secure in the knowledge of being chosen, of belonging to people who'd fought to build something good from broken pieces. And on quiet nights, when the house was still and the children long grown, Clara would sometimes stand at that same window and look out at the Wyoming sky and think of all the roads she'd traveled to get here. The wrong turns that became right ones, the mistakes that became mercies, the girl who'd given up everything and the woman who'd found everything by learning, finally, to stay. She'd been the wrong girl once, but she'd become exactly the right woman. And that made all the difference.